Okay, we're back for a review that I don't know how it's going to go. Actually, I have an idea how it's going to go, but this book was really interesting to read, and it was a thing I've been meaning to read for a couple of years. So we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about today on our little lovely Sunday and corner of the internet. I'll be discussing In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. So Julia Alvarez is a Dominican author, and they immigrated to the United States in they fled the Dominican Republic with their parents in, I believe, 1960, almost at the end of an era where the Dominican Republic was ruled by a dictator. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book that they wrote in 1994, which is In the Time of the Butterflies, that specifically takes place in that era. So let's read the synopsis here on Goodreads, and yeah. Set during the waning days of the Trujillo dictatorship in the Dominican Republic in 1960, this extraordinary novel tells the story. I think it's supposed to say, the Mirabal sisters. It just says the story, the Mirabal sisters. Three young wives and mothers who are assassinated after visiting their jailed husbands. From the author of How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents comes this tale of courage and sisterhood set in the Dominican Republic during the rise of the Trujillo dictatorship. A skillful blend of fact and fiction, In the Time of the Butterflies is inspired by the true story of the three Mirabal sisters who, in 1960, were murdered for their part in the underground plot to overthrow the government. Alvarez breathes life into these historical figures, known as Las Mariposas, or the butterflies, in the underground, as she imagines their teenage years, their gradual involvement with the revolution, and their terror as their dissentience. This dissentience is uncovered. Alvarez's controlled writing perfectly captures the mounting tension as the butterflies near their horrific end. The novel begins with the recollections of Dede, the fourth and surviving sister who fears abandoning her routines and her husband to join the movement. Alvarez also offers the perspectives of the other sisters, brave and outspoken Minerva, the family's political ringleader, pious Patria, who forsakes her faith to join her sisters after witnessing the atrocities of the tyranny, and the baby sister, sensitive Maria Teresa, who, in a series of diaries, chronicles her allegiance to Minerva and the physical and spiritual anguish of prison life. In the Time of the Butterflies is an American Library Association notable book and the 1995 National Book Critics Circle Award nominee. So, honestly, I'll say this. Quick disclaimer. If this is not the author specifically says in a postscript at the end of the book that she took significant liberties when it comes to telling this story. So if you really want to know the what the Trujillo era was like, I suggest looking at nonfiction sources. I myself am not an expert in this at all. Growing up, I didn't really learn about my history I didn't really learn Dominican history growing up. I kind of have an idea about it slightly because I decided to research uh, some of it in high school, and I also did a little bit of research when it came to the sisters before recording this review and before writing it in my blog. So it's an interesting thing to kind of read about. So definitely pick up any, like, look into nonfiction sources if you want to know more about this era, because I am not a nonfiction source and I am no expert. And the author did mention that they took liberties, and that they did things such as change dates and all that stuff, and anything that kind of, a lot of it was basically more fiction than not. So while there are grains of truth, there is also a lot of fiction. So yeah. So as this is a story based in a true historical account, and these are like the real, and we're just hearing the story of the real women, it was very interesting to read it. So I had been meaning to read it ever since I was about 16 or 17. And basically, the way it kind of started off for me was, I don't know what brought up this conversation with me and my Spanish teacher in high school, but the Mirabal sisters came up and she told me that there were these two books, and she told me about In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, and then, although I now realize it was actually the memoir written by Dede Mirabal, I thought this was actually written by Julia Alvarez, and that is Vivas en su Jardín, which is a memoir that I will hopefully read at some point. I do want to read it, but I'm a little scared about it. I talked about it in a vlog, if you remember. It should be posted by now, actually. But I did talk about it in a vlog, and one of the things that kind of scares me about reading the memoir is that it is in Spanish and that it has not been translated into English, and I don't know how much I'll actually understand. So point is, I had been taking a Spanish class, so I decided to practice, and I downloaded the book in Spanish from Bookshare. I reached page 25 and I was so confused, like extremely confused. So I quit the book, and it's still kind of stuck in my head for like the last couple of years. And then I kind of found it in Bard looking for other books, I think. I don't remember how I found it, but I found it. And I'm like, you know what? I am just going to read it, okay? I'm just going to read it. I've been meaning to read it. And honestly, reading this book was also my first, my very, very first, what's it called? Meeting, I guess, with this author's writing. I think this author is a really good writing. I think the writing in the story was amazing. The writing style was good. I have one complaint, which I'll talk about it later, but in a minute. I'll talk about it in a minute, actually, but mostly the story and pacing were actually really good. I do think, however, that some things did need to be expanded on, specifically with character and also the romances that kept coming up. Now, I know that the romances and things like that were not part of the story, but some of this stuff I felt needed to be expanded on. I actually think this book would have benefited from being longer. It's only 337 pages. Pretty short read. I think it would have benefited from being much longer so that it could be expanded on, so things could be expanded on. Specifically in Patria and Minerva's point of view. When it comes to Maria Teresa, I don't mind as much because hers was expanded a little bit more, because it was kind of like her stuff was mainly diary entries, while everybody else had like full-fledged narrative chapters. We got her mostly in journal entries, which I thought was a really interesting thing to bring up, just to have there. So that's one of those things. And they also, I think it could have been, some of the parts of the characters could have just been better developed, and the romantic stuff could have actually been better developed as well. There's also a lot of telling in this story. I have no issue with this as much, but I do want to mention that there's kind of a lot of passage of time where we're being told stuff. But I don't mind this as much. It kind of comes off as like a, we're being told this story as best as we can, and there's like a lot of things that happen that we just don't need to see necessarily. So it was actually very interesting to see. Um, and I think the sisters felt very, very real. One of the things I appreciated in this writing is that they were not put under like up on a pedestal. They felt like real people, real women who were going through hell really in all this stuff. And one of the things I appreciated a lot, which I talked about this in my Iron Widow review, or I will talk about it actually because I have not filmed it yet. And one of the things that I think about Iron Widow is one of the things that I find very interesting, comparing this to Iron Widow, is that while Minerva was kind of like a feminist and always responded with feminist quip and always had like a feminist argument, we saw the development of Minerva becoming a feminist and becoming very much, rebellious and like a rebel, and becoming more politically interested and all that stuff. And in Iron Widow, we do not see that from Jetien. So yeah, I can't say yeah, no, I think this is more, I think, feminist than Iron Widow, I will say. But that's one of those things that that I find very interesting about this whole thing, that you kind of saw her go from completely sheltered to, when she went to the her boarding school, she realized, oh shit, things are bad. You know what I mean? So she kind of realized things are bad at boarding school, and she was exposed to how bad things are. So I think it was really good to see how that is. And I find it kind of interesting to kind of see her development. One of the things that did sort of bother me as a reader is the shift between third and first person. Now it's not often that it happens, but through some parts of the story, we get Dede's point of view in third person, and then we get everyone else's point of view in first person, and then we also get Dede's point of view in first person in the epilogue. And it just, I don't know, for me, going from first person to third person, or from third person to first person, is extremely jarring. Could just be me, but I don't really like that a lot. I think the book also gave us another thing that I kind of thought that was really interesting is, I don't think the book gave us very much world building. Like, one of the things that I feel about this book is that it didn't give us a lot of world building. It did not feel, I did not feel like I was in the environment in the whole Trujillo environment. I didn't feel like I was in the 1930s or in the 1940s or in the 50s or 60s. I didn't really feel like I was there as a reader. I felt like the world building was lacking. So for anyone who just isn't, I'm Dominican, but I also, first of all, I don't know where the Ojo de Agua is. I know that it's somewhere in Salcedo from what we're being told in the story, but I know nothing else. Like, I'm not given any explanation, any world building, none of that. And I think that the world building is essential, especially for people who literally have no clue where they are. And this is historical fiction, so I think it's important to give us that atmosphere. So yeah, so that's kind of like my main thing that I have. But most of it though, most of the story was amazing, and it was really interesting. I think it gave a pretty good depiction of women in Dominican Republic, especially during that time, and especially in like women I've met who might follow through some similar things for one reason or another. I think it was really interesting to see. And by similar things, I meant like the whole gender role stuff, because there are gender roles in the book. Although I'm pretty sure Minerva would be considered a bit of a gender shattering person, I feel. So I think coming out of this book, I don't think there is a way for me to really discuss all the feelings I have through this book, my personal feelings, not review feelings, but like other feelings I have. I think it was interesting to reflect on this book. I have been reflecting a little bit on this book for the longest time, and I don't think I can put those feelings into words. But the things that I kind of feel about this book are, well, one, it was really interesting to read, of course, and it was really interesting to get a story from with these women who are really, they're feminist icons, and their legacy still continues. They left an interesting legacy, and they also have and they also did such important work in both in they're national heroes when you think about it, because in international heroes as well, because they did such important work in the Dominican Republic. And although it took years for them to gain recognition for the work that they did, they finally did. And I genuinely hope they continue to gain recognition. And they are taught, from my understanding, these women are also taught about in Dominican schools. I really wish they were taught more here, but of course they're not. Especially because of what I'm about to tell you in a little bit. So one of the things that is known about Trujillo is that he had and that you get to see this in the story, and he had one of the things that my cousin told me specifically, because she studied this in school, is that when he was there, the crime rate was low, but he was committing all the crimes. And the other thing that was said is, and the other thing that was very well known, is that he had a liking, shall we say, content warning, by the way, right now, for assault, for sexual assault. Content warning right now. He had a liking for young girls, and some of these girls were teenagers. And so what would happen, he had also a very strong sexual appetite and all that stuff, but he mainly liked young girls. And the things that would happen is he would send his secret police to get him young girls, who would either, some of them may have consented, but others who didn't may have just been raped by this dictator. And it is very hard to kind of hear this, I know, but that's kind of what would happen. And one of the things that we see in the book, and that actually happened in real life, is that Trujillo showed his interest in Minerva, and he did not hide his intentions and asked her to be his mistress, which she declined. And after that, however, her life basically became hell. And what ended up happening is her father was arrested, and the thing that he said is, like, if she would sleep with him, he would be sent back. Oh, she declined again. Eventually her father was sent back, but the book suggests, and I think my research also suggests, that he died because of the damage done in prison. It changed him completely. And another thing that also happened as well is that eventually, after years of asking her parents, Minerva finally was allowed to attend college, and she studied law. And although she graduated at the top of her class, and she graduated and she got her degree, she was not given, although she graduated technically, she was not given the license to practice law. It was declined by Trujillo. So yes, he had power pretty much over everything and everyone. And his secret police would basically tell him about pretty much anything, and he would just suss out, I guess, rebellion. And that is hard. I cannot imagine what people went through, and I cannot imagine what it was like for anyone during that era. Trujillo was eventually assassinated in 1961, 6 months after the sisters were assassinated. He was killed by some conspirators, but also by the military, I think was the one that joined. However, after his death, dictatorship kind of still continued because his successor basically continued the similar traditions, and the Dominican Republic didn't go into a democracy until the 70s. So, yeah, also very interesting to know about Trujillo is that he was actually trained by the U.S. Marines. So, yeah, he was trained by the United States Marines, guys. Something I thought that should be known. Yeah, he was trained by them. Interesting, isn't it? So yeah. So one of the things that I did while reading the book was that I did a little bit of research on the Mirabal sisters. I also did some research after. And my introductory research was a Wikipedia page because I usually like to go to a Wikipedia page to give me an overview of things. And one of the things that I saw was a historian who wrote about them. And I didn't like the language used, and I am going to read it to you right now. I should actually open this because I was actually going to just talk about it and kind of mention part of it. But I think I want to kind of read you the paragraph because I think it's very telling to me how this was written. I mean, at least looking at it through my own experiences as femme presenting, as someone who appears as a woman, and stuff like that. So I think it was it was a very it was interesting to read it, but also just terrible. So in a way, no, hold on, let me see. Is this here? Okay. According to historian Bernard Diedrich, the sisters' assassinations, quote, had greater effect on Dominicans than most of Trujillo's other crimes. That in itself is not bad, by the way, but I do want to say though that after all this, this is the thing that had effect, and I find this kind of concerning about my own country, if we're being honest. And it says here, the killings, he wrote, and then in quote, did something to their machismo and paved the way for Trujillo's own assassination 6 months later. These are the two sentences I wanted to read. The quote here that I wanted to point out is that the killings did something to their machismo. The problem I find with this narrative in this page, then again, this page was quoting from a historian and was probably paraphrasing it, so I don't necessarily blame the Wikipedia page. I do blame how the historian may have written about them. Even if I have not read the paper, I do blame this quote a little because I do think that this quote is, the language used is not the best. So the quote did something to their machismo to me is very diminishing of the work that these women have done. These women are feminist icons. Even Julia Alvarez, I think, says something about them being feminist icons and being feminists in their own right. And I agree. These women were feminists in their own right. So the fact that it says it did something to their machismo, to me, is diminishing of their work and the accomplishments that they have done. So I'm going to look up what machismo is. I looked it up right now. The dictionary definition of machismo is, by the way, I'm looking it up because I want to see what it says. Strong or aggressive masculine pride. So that is a problem because machismo is a very aggressive thing. So when the words did something to their machismo says that is that it made them kind of more aggressive. And machismo implies a very negative connotation, which it is, by the way. I have seen what it kind of looks like in my own what it looks like in my own life, and it is terrible. Machismo itself is a terrible thing in my opinion. I don't have any issue with being proud of being a man, but I do have issue with the way that masculinity can be used in the way that certain things are kind of glossed over and the way that some men behave because they're quote unquote male. I do have a problem with that, which is one of the reasons I don't subscribe to gender roles and one of the reasons I think gender roles are stupid. But also, I think that the fact that this historian wrote that the killings did something to their machismo, I think is very, very diminishing of their work. And I don't think that is the proper phrasing that should be used. And I don't think this is a phrase that should have been used. Another thing I found really interesting is that I watched a podcast episode about their lives from Criminal Broads, which was hosted by Tori Telfer. And she also used this this quote, and I don't think it should have been used at all in that podcast, and I also don't think it should have been used by that historian. It's very diminishing of their work, and it makes it kind of look like the fact that they were killed is kind of what inspired his downfall, which in a way it did, but also didn't at the same time, because these women were were actively rebelling for months, if not for years, I think, if I recall correctly, before they got assassinated. The book specifically talks about even this is actually real, I think. So they talk about how even their children were actually kind of involved in the rebellion. So like some of their teenage children. So it is very, the fact that the historian wrote that, to me, is diminishing. This is diminishing language. And that's why I'm saying that language is important, because the words you use are very important and they have influence, and that's diminishing to me of their work. So this book was published in 1994, but what's interesting about them is that they eventually got recognized, as international heroines. And one of the ways that they get recognized today is what occurred in 1999. So in 1999, the United Nations declared November 25th the elimination of violence against women day. So that's what this day is, November 25th every year. And November 25th specifically is the date that the sisters got assassinated. So we commemorate them. So they're being commemorated in the anniversary of their death with awareness on the elimination of violence against women. I think that's actually quite interesting. There is also I think there's like a statue of Trujillo somewhere, and it is covered in murals of the sisters. Also, there was a foundation opened by, I think, Dede, or at least the Mirabal family. Definitely, there was a foundation opened. There's also a museum, which I believe is still, I don't know if her family still runs it, but I know that Dede died 2014 at, I believe, age 87. But she used to run a museum to remember the sisters that was basically in their old house in Ojo de Agua, and it was their old house, and they have like some of their personal stuff along with the items that with the items that basically that were collected when they were assassinated. So yeah, it's very interesting. Uh, their children, the sister's children, were all raised by Bebe, alongside her own children. There is really a lot. I think it's very interesting to kind of reflect on this book, and it is important to, I think, learn and remember, or like learn our history a little when we can. I used to hate history in school, but when I have to research it on my own, I'm perfectly happy learning about it. I think it was really interesting to read this, and I think it gave me more appreciation for the history that I don't really know that much about. And I think the fact that Alvarez didn't put them on a pedestal is also very important, because these were real women that went through real horrors during that era. And I've been talking a lot because I think it was very emotional for me to read it, as someone who was originally born in Dominican Republic, and can say that I didn't get that I did not quite get that I was never born in that era. I was born in 1999, but it was very interesting to me to read it, and I think it was just very emotional for me to read this book. I think, knowing all that. There is an adaptation of In the Time of the Butterflies, by the way, as well. There's a movie adaptation. I think it came out in 2001 or so. So if I find it, I might watch the movie. Maybe I'll react to it if I find it. I don't know where I can find it. So that is my review and personal reflection on In the Time of the Butterflies. This was a little bit deeper than I expected it to get, but here we are. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know what review is coming up next week, but hope it's something good. Anyway, until then, consider subscribing, check the description for links, turn on notification bell, and one of the links in the description is my blog, and also a couple of other series I run in the channel, so check those out. And comment down below, have you read In the Time of the Butterflies? And if you did, how did you feel? Also, based on this, do you plan to read it? There are no books that I have read like this, and because of this, I will not be making any recommendations for after In the Time of the Butterflies. Honestly, I don't think any books I have could simulate that kind of emotion. So I will not be recommending anything after. So I just recommend that you read In the Time of the Butterflies, and you let me know kind of what you think about it. So yeah. Anywho, I'll see you soon. Until next time, consume stories.